Welcome to our webinar. Why are you here? So, promise that we have for you to take away from this webinar are you're going to walk away with cost-effective strategies to implement this ANSI AAMI ST108. At the end of this webinar, all the attendees will receive an implementation roadmap for seamless implementation to your site that we have developed here at GetChemREADY. And if you decide to stay the entire time, we have a webinar only offer for the webinar attendees only. So if you decide to stay to the end, you will also receive that. So what's the difference here at GetChemREADY? Well, why do you want to listen to us when it comes to AAMI ST108? GetChemREADY, we offer custom solutions to your facility. We're not a one size fit all. We're not an equipment supplier only. We don't do testing only. We do a holistic package to get your facility into compliance for ST108. So we have a full offering, include consulting, testing, equipment, support, and preventive maintenance. All that is inclusive for your facility that will benefit you and your team. Is this for me? This session alone is, if you're here, it's perfect for any sterile processing professionals, healthcare administrators, facility managers, and ambulatory surgical center managers who are navigating the implementation of ST108. What are the three main problems that we've talked to customers over the last really 3 years? The last year has been ST108 when it came out August 4th last year. But the three main problems that when we have conversations with customers are the following. First is, I don't know anything about the standard or what to do, right? ST108 is over a 100-page document and you need to be in compliance, but you don't really know what it says or what you need to do and how it applies to your facility. Another problem would be, I know that ST108 exists. I know that I need to do something, but I don't know where to start. And finally, hey, I know that the standard exists, got a critical water system, but I really don't know if it's in compliance. So those are some of the most common questions that we get here at GetChemREADY when we discuss ST108. Quick introduction about myself. My name is Ben Frieders, as I mentioned. My background, I was actually a U.S. Navy submariner. I was the nuclear chemistry supervisor on board 2 fast attack submarines. Transitioned out of the Navy about 5 years ago to become the business development and marketing manager here at GetChemREADY. And I am also the product development officer for the ST108 offering. Also certified AOC 12080 for Legionella water safety. And I've been published in a couple magazines about ST108 and Legionella and how it applies to the Joint Commission. A little background on me. So again, the reason to stay to the very end is that we have a webinar only offer for all the attendees. So if you decide to stay through all the way to the training, that will be presented there at the very end of this webinar. So the reason we're all here, ANSI AAMI ST108. So what is the standard and what do you need to know? If you're not aware, or if you've heard of it for the first time, ST108 is water quality for the processing of medical devices. So this standard covers the selection and maintenance of the effective water quality suitable for processing medical devices. This can be anywhere from critical, semi-critical, non-critical medical devices, and all the sterilization required to perform surgery or medical procedures. It encompasses the guidelines for water treatment equipment, water distribution and storage, the quality control procedures for monitoring that water quality, strategies for bacteria control, and environmental and personnel considerations. So the history behind AAMI ST108 is ANSI and AAMI developed a technical information report, TIR 34, back in 2014. So this report and this information has been out for about 10 years. So here at GetChemREADY, we've been aware of TIR 34 for over 5 years now and advising customers and clients on how to implement these standards. So what a TIR is, it's a review of technical issues. It's basically a publication from these institutes and organizations that say, here are the things that we are considering to create and make a standard from. We're going to provide some initial guidance, but then we're going to get feedback from the field on what we think the final standard should be. AAMI ST108 came from this TIR 34. It was approved by AAMI in June 30th of last year, and it was finally approved by ANSI on August 4th. This webinar is celebrating the 1-year anniversary of the standard being published and all the implications that it will have for your facilities. I'm going to go through some of the pieces and parts of the standard and how they're going to relate to your facility. So first off, roles and responsibilities is part of the first part of the section. So this section identifies the team that's responsible for managing this standard and the water quality. Um, as we talk to customers, this is going to vary vastly between the types of facilities that you're in. So if you're a large hospital complex, you likely have all of these people in different departments that can participate as part of this multidisciplinary team. If you're an ambulatory surgical center, it's probably one person doing a lot of these jobs, right? Wearing multiple hats. So keep that in mind when you look at this section. But the standard itself says that the multidisciplinary team should include senior organizational leadership, authority to make command decisions, facilities engineering staff, infection prevention and control, medical device processing personnel, i.e. your sterile processing department, clinical engineering staff, surgical suite procedure room personnel, and if you've got an existing consultant that does other water treatment consulting for you, a water treatment specialist, such as what we provide here at GetChemREADY. So this entire team is responsible for developing, implementing, and documenting all the requirements of this water management program that is now required for ST108. As I mentioned before, the ambulatory surgical centers likely do not have different personnel with these responsibilities. So usually it's a head nurse or your administrator at your facility, and you probably have multiple hats where you're responsible for all of these things. So keep that in mind that the team may in fact be a one-person team. Hopefully you've got more than that to help you implement this for your facility. And what are the responsibilities? So the responsibilities are as follows. So facilities engineer personnel, multidisciplinary water management consultant or other contracted personnel. They are responsible and their actions are the general assessment of the water quality. So they should routinely sample water and determine if those values are within the range of the water management plan and per the ST108 standard. Facilities engineering, medical device processing personnel, water management consultants, or other external contracts. Their actions and responsibilities include implementation of water treatment processes and determining the appropriate equipment required for the facility's water supply. We'll get into that a little bit here a bit later. The city water supply can vary vastly in being compliant with the utility water standards. Also includes medical device processing personnel in conjunction with clinical engineering or external consultants again. Their actions and responsibilities include assurance of proper water quality for the various stages in the medical device processing. And they do that through water quality monitoring. And then all members, they manage the entire water management program to make sure from the entrance of the city water into your facility all the way to the final sterilization step in your process, everybody is responsible to make sure that the program as a whole is compliant. I'll take a quick moment to some housekeeping I forgot at the very beginning. If you do have any questions, please drop that in the group chat. Our facilitators will compile those questions and we'll have about a 10 minutes question and answer session at the end of this webinar. So that moves us to the risk analysis. Most facilities should start this step to identify what it is that they need to do to be compliant with ST108. So the reason that we are doing this risk analysis is the whole point of the standard is that water impurities can lead to surgical site infections. The whole reason that AAMI developed the standard is to minimize the possibility of surgical site infections because of medical devices. So they have recognized that impurities on those medical devices can have adverse effects. And some of those adverse effects to the medical devices and the process itself could include corrosion, pitting, and scaling. Could have biofilm buildup, increased microbial load or endotoxin content. It can also have adverse effects to the process. So decreased effectiveness of cleaning agents, degradation of the water system itself or the processing from biofouling or scaling. And then effects to patient and personnel could be infection, toxicity, fevers, and environmental health and safety from chemical handling, exposure, and injury, worst case scenario. So risk analysis must be performed by each facility per the standard to identify each of these hazards, how they can have effect on your particular facility's system. The risk analysis for water quality should be completed prior to water system installation. So I know a lot of facilities already have water systems. That doesn't mean that you should not do this. The risk analysis still needs to be performed for your existing system to understand what parameters your system is capable of creating and what the risks associated with each piece of equipment could be and how they could contribute to adverse patient effects or outcomes. Some of the characteristics for this risk analysis include physical appearance of the water, to include color, clarity, and absence of particulates, the microbial level in water, inorganic and organic contaminants of water, the pH, conductivity, and the water temperature. All of those have an effect on medical device processing itself. And the standard does go into pretty decent detail about how those affect each of the medical devices. The other thing to consider, and we'll talk about the types of water that this standard monitors and requires, is the municipal water supply. The city water supply should also have a microbial level of less than 500 CFUs per milliliter, and that's per the EPA standards. So in addition to your final rinse and for final sterilization processing, you also use utility water in different parts of medical device processing, and those have particular water quality parameters you have to monitor to include microbial levels. As I mentioned before, there are 3 categories of water monitored by ST108. Those include utility water, critical water, and steam. Now, a common misconception about steam is a lot of the sterilization equipment out there, to include Steris and Gettings and other equipment manufacturers, the steam that's created inside of the device itself for sterilization, that is not what is covered in this standard. The steam we're speaking of is in a larger hospital system or even a smaller facility. The steam from the central plant that supplies heating for, say, HVAC processes, but all other things. Sometimes that steam is admitted to your sterilization equipment. And that steam needs to be monitored for water quality. And then also there are localized steam generators that are standalone, separate from your sterilization equipment that provide steam to those units. So when we talk steam, we're not talking about the steam created inside the sterilizer. We're talking about an external source from external to the sterilization and the final delivery. Some misconceptions we've run across there. So we'll talk about each one of these and how they apply. Utility water. So water as it comes from the tap. So as I mentioned a couple slides ago, this is directly from the city. This water is mainly used in medical device processing for flushing, washing, and intermediate rinsing. In terms of the decision regarding the need to treat incoming tap water, it should be undertaken in every facility that processes medical devices. And AAMI ST108 provides the guidance of what those water quality standards should be. So utility water, think city water. Critical water is the water that meets the water quality measurements for typically the very final rinse or the final sterilization in your medical device processing step. Typically, it requires extensive treatment, multiple steps to include pre-treatment, i.e. softeners or carbon filters, reverse osmosis, deionization, and critical water also includes specific storage requirements for that water, the distribution loop that delivers that water, and then also includes final treatment that can include UV sterilization and endotoxin bacteria filtration that are removed as the final filtration step from the water. So when we talk critical water, we're talking the entire process from start to finish, pre-treatment all the way to the final endotoxin and bacteria treatment. That final product water is called critical water. And this is the only water quality that is acceptable for the final rinse after a high level disinfection. The note down here is it's important to understand your individual equipment that you have in your facility. So using critical water for all stages of medical device processing is not encouraged. It's unnecessary, and it can actually cause damage to your equipment. It's important to contact your local equipment rep or manufacturer rep to understand what quality of water those devices should take. We don't talk too much in this webinar, but we're happy to have a conversation about the specifics of that as well. And then finally, as I mentioned before, and I had my caveats about steam in terms of AAMI ST108, vaporized water that is produced by either a centralized boiler or a generator / heat exchanger near the sterilizer. So it's not the steam inside the sterilizer itself. If it generates its own steam, again, it comes from an external source. The notes here, and we'll talk about the water quality parameters shortly. There are two different specs when you see the pH range on this next slide. For local steam generation, you have a different range. Say pH should be between 5.0 to 7.5. And boiler treated steam, which is consistent with traditional industrial water treatment, you should maintain a condensate pH between 7.5 to 9.2. This slide is important. If you do not have a copy of the standard, happy for you to take a screenshot to have this. The ST108 requires that during the process of evaluating your existing critical water and utility water treatment systems through each of the steps, these are the water quality parameters that we are measuring against. So if you can see, there are many traditional water quality analyses such as pH, total alkalinity, color turbidity, total organic carbon, and bacteria and endotoxin. And we also have multiple ionic contaminants that must analyze for utility water, critical water, and steam. There are slight variations between each category of water, as you see there. For example, utility water needs to test for bacteria, but does not need to test for TOC or endotoxin, while critical water is required to test for every single contaminant there. So it's important to understand what you need to test and how to be compliant. We'll talk about that in the webinar of how taking these tests are the first step towards figuring out if you can become compliant or not when it comes to ST108. Here's some pieces of equipment that you should be fairly familiar with if you are in SPDs or if you're in healthcare in general. So Steris is a common manufacturer. Obviously, there are multiple other manufacturers out there, Gettings being another one. These are the pieces of equipment that would require that critical water delivered to these devices. So you have washer disinfectors, ultrasonic irrigators and cleaners, hospital cart washers, and decontamination sinks. So again, as the standard mentioned before, not each of these devices is require critical water to be delivered to them at each stage, but it's important to understand your equipment to know where it needs to be delivered. Most commonly, you're going to have your washer disinfectors have critical water. Uncommonly, it would be a decontamination sink. Typically, that is fed by traditional city water or utility water if it's had some pre-treatment to it. Water treatment systems. So in the standard, it's when a new water treatment system is needed, healthcare facility normally works with the water treatment specialists, such as GetChemREADY, that's familiar with the quality of tap water in the area to design the system. So from that, we and other consultants can recommend the water treatment devices that are needed to produce the water quality needed by the facility. And each area is different. So for example, GetChemREADY is based here in Twinsburg, Ohio. I live in Indianapolis, Indiana. The differences between water quality from the city between the Cleveland area itself and the Indianapolis area are vastly different. So if you're in Cleveland, you don't have to do a lot of treatment to get within the standards of utility water. Whereas if you're in Indiana, then you need to have some type of treatment to meet those utility water specs. So someone that is familiar with the area that your facility is located is vitally important in terms of the decision to become compliant in terms of water quality treatment equipment. If you're unsure of what a typical critical water system would involve, we mentioned it earlier, Here it would be a traditional hospital type setup. Okay. In order to get your final critical water quality, you would need some type of carbon filtration that would remove chlorine. Water softener would remove calcium and magnesium ions, amongst some other minimal contaminants. Reverse osmosis system that will take up to 90% of the rest of the ionic contaminants. Some type of deionization, whether it's deionization tanks that you exchange on a monthly or quarterly basis, or an electro deionization system. All of those pieces would feed to a specialized storage tank. The storage tank, per the standard, must be cone bottom, and it also must have some type of air filtration, usually a HEPA filter, to prevent any airborne contaminants to come into your system. And then, if that wasn't enough, you also have to have some additional filtration and disinfection to typically include UV and a final bacteria and endotoxin filter. All of that will feed to, now a requirement is to a recirculation loop that would feed your washer disinfectors, steam sterilizers, and any other equipment that requires your critical water. Once those are fed to those devices, you would then have a return loop that comes back to the storage tank and then continuously recirculate that into a loop. So right off the bat, if you know you don't have most of these pieces of equipment, you can be pretty sure that you're not in compliance, and you're probably going to need to look into some capital expenditure for this. So as I mentioned, this was a typical hospital system. I know the people that work at ambulatory surgical centers are saying there's no room for that. There's no way we can even afford nor space all of these pieces of equipment. Well, there are pieces of equipment out there. GetChemREADY is a supplier of one. There are technologies out there that have mounted all of this technology onto a single skid. Depending on the amount of critical water you require on a daily basis, this could supply everything you need. And the carbon, softening, deionization, everything, recirculation pump is all on one skid. You would just need a storage tank, and those two pieces, you would need to find a closet or some other mechanical room to meet that. So those are your two options when it comes to critical water systems. Your full big hospital spec, because typically the hospitals have a larger demand for critical water, and ASC type system that puts out less amount of water, but is perfect for the smaller surgery centers. More on the standard. So we've talked about the water quality equipment required to make critical water. Part of the standard includes the validation plan. Validation plan for a water system typically includes these steps. So part of understanding what you need is, we've talked before about the risk assessment. Risk assessment needs to understand the quality characteristics of your existing water and what you're hoping to achieve. With that, you can select the equipment, the control systems, and then you can go down the path of selecting your monitoring techniques for water quality, which typically includes laboratory testing. And then there are sections for installation, operational, and performance qualifications. So if your eyes haven't glazed over yet and you're like, what does that even mean? We'll talk about the specifics here shortly. All that to say is, AAMI ST108 is a pretty intensive document, but there is a path forward that you can take that is step by step to get your facility compliant. So we'll skip over the installation and the operational qualification today. We'll focus just on performance qualification. So when it comes to the performance qualification, what this section in the standard means is, there needs to be monitoring in place to verify that your existing critical water system or the system that you just installed are going to meet the specs that you need to meet the standard. Okay. Part of some of the conversations that we've had with customers, their eyes get really big and they see the dollar signs this is going to take to implement. The section 9 in the standard specifically says, after the installation and qualification of a water treatment system, a typical validation program involves intensive daily sampling and testing at post-water treatment system test points and at the point of water use for a defined period of time. against the criteria listed in table 2, and then test at a reduced frequency for at least 1 calendar year. You don't understand the implications on that. Per the standard, what that means is if you come to a critical water system, it means that after each treatment step, carbon filter, water softener, reverse osmosis, DI, UV, and bacteria endotoxin testing, you require intensive daily testing against table 2, all of those ionic contaminants I showed you before, for a period of time, and then at a reduced frequency for a year. What does that mean in practical terms? You're talking $50,000 to $100,000 in laboratory testing. It's a pretty big step up, right? From having to do nothing to having to be compliant with the system. So we here at GetChemREADY, we understand what that means, right? So during the performance qualification, it says the entire water treatment system should be assessed. It should be understood prior to selecting the sampling locations, and the number of sample sites for daily sampling may be reduced, providing that all sample sites are examined at some point during the performance qualification. What this means from a location standpoint are that the incoming water should be tested following each treatment step and at each point of use, including utility water at each point of use and the critical water, and to include the steam sampling. Your eyes are probably pretty big right now and said, how do I do this? And how do I start? At GetChemREADY, after the last year of the standard being in place and having analyzed TIR 34, we've developed a plan that should be pretty simple for you to implement. Is that instead of doing all of the parts in the performance qualification and doing that all and taking that big lump sum up front in terms of all the testing, we have a plan that can help you. Look, by just taking 2 sets of samples, by taking 1 critical water test package and 1 utility water test package, by just doing those 2 test packages, we can develop a plan of action to help your facility get into compliance, right? Not only get into compliance, but develop a plan to talk to the people who are in charge of your budget and figure out a reasonable plan that the Joint Commission or Medicare, Medicaid will accept when they come to audit your facility. That does not meet the requirements of this performance qualification. No, it does not. However, we don't know if you are compliant to begin with until we do 1 utility water test and 1 critical water test. And we propose those be after a softener if you have it, or at the city water, and then after all of the steps for your critical water system before it gets to your points of use. Once we have that data, we can help you develop over the course of time that will help you have a conversation with auditors that will go much easier. We found after talking to dozens of facilities that if you at least have had a plan of action to implement and you have talked to a consultant that is familiar with how to implement that plan, those 2 things alone will typically get you by an inspection as long as you implement the plan later. So what does that do? That gives you time to budget it into your fiscal year, right? That gives you time to find vendors that can help you do the installation if you require equipment. What these tests also do is, best case scenario, you've done some legwork up until this point and you take a critical water test and you meet all the parameters at critical water, you're in better shape than most because your system's already putting out the quality of water, which is the whole point of the standard. So we can develop a plan for you to make sure we've got the data collected for the performance qualification and make sure come audit time that nobody has any questions about what your facility is doing. So again, when we're talking the utility and the critical water tests, it is a test package that includes every single one of these parameters, which typically could cost you thousands and thousands of dollars. Lucky for you, we've developed a webinar only price. So thank you for coming today and learning a little bit about the standard. After you talk about your budget and money, what will benefit you for the long term. So as I mentioned before, per the standard, the intensive daily sampling and testing at the water treatment system test points is pretty intensive. But if you don't know where to start and you don't know if you're compliant, we're asking you to just start with 2 tests today. And if you've got steam, we'll call it 3. So our typical testing package standards is pretty expensive, right? From a laboratory standpoint, we're talking $846 for a critical water test package and $666 for utility water. When you add up all the numbers of tests that you're going to have to perform for 12 months, that's going to add up. So we today have offered you a webinar only price of $735 and $573 per sample test package. That includes everything you need to do to start your compliance journey. As a thank you to you, as part of this webinar, if you go to www.GetChemREADY.com/AAMI-ST108-webinar, there will be a form that will lock in that pricing. And we promise to you that we will lock in that pricing for 12 months from the moment you enter your initial order. Now, you're asking yourself, why should I even fill out this form? I'm probably not ready to do this. The other thing that we promise is that filling out the form to lock in your pricing holds no obligation to you to purchase anything today or ever if you don't want to. But if you don't register for it, then we go back to our standard list price if you decide not to register and lock in your pricing today. As I promised at the beginning of the webinar, the other thing you will receive as part of attending our webinar is our roadmap of implementation. So GetChemREADY has developed a timeline and a roadmap for you to look at each step of the implementation process from start to finish if you're not really sure what to do. So that includes our 10 steps to create your team, understanding your water quality requirements, conduct risk assessment, and all the way down through your maintenance of documentation and auditing to make sure that from start to finish, your facility and your team will be compliant. So we offer that today as a gift to you. So some of you are going to say, hey, I'm not ready to do anything. I'm not ready to do any laboratory testing. It's not in my budget. We're waiting till calendar year 25. Again, what we offer is there's no obligation to pay. And eventually, when you have to do your performance qualification, you will save thousands of dollars in implementation costs if you register and submit the form for the webinar only today. Again, that's www.getchemready.com/AAMI, AAMI-ST108-webinar. That brings me to the end. That was a little bit quicker than I thought. I know Chris has been diligently compiling any questions. Chris, let's take it over to you to see what questions the group has and what we can answer today.
You bet. So W. Cruz says, may I request a copy of the new regulations so I can share with our CSR and P&E?
New copy of the regulation. So that's a great question. So unfortunately, AAMI has, I won't call it a racket, but I might call it a racket, is that the AAMI ST108 regulation does cost around $300. And it's a publication that the American Association of Medical Instruments owns solely. So we are not authorized. We only have one copy ourselves. We're only authorized to have our own copy. And unfortunately, we cannot supply that to you as well. But I would, if you follow up with our team, we can direct you to the online bookstore where you could purchase a digital copy for your team. Good question.
So DB says, how about steam condensate testing? So in other words, for the test package, should there be, just like how there's a test for the critical and utility test packages, is there one for steam condensate as well?
There is. We did not post that on the slide. There is a discounted webinar price that you'll be locked into. Our team, if you have attended this webinar, will send you the implementation roadmap in addition to the webinar pricing sheet that will lock you in if you sign up with the form.
Awesome. Now, that's the end of our questions. Oh, here we go. Lynn asks, can you speak to the recommended versus required? There seem to be several recommendations.
Sure. And just to clarify, we're talking the compliance testing itself, I assume. You can correct me if I'm wrong.
I'm guessing so. Yeah, she says yes.
Okay. So the requirements for the performance qualification, as I mentioned before, to be 100% compliant, it says, going back to here, a typical validation program involves intensive daily sampling and testing at post-water treatment system test points and at point of water use for a defined period of time against the criteria listed in Table 2, and then testing at a reduced frequency for at least 1 calendar year to identify seasonal changes. So, as you might notice, it is very ambiguous and it is not hard and fast. The thought process behind the standard, and we have interacted and we have consultants that we talked to that were actually on the committee that created the standard. So, the intent behind this section 9 is you need to sample as much as necessary, depending upon your each area is going to be different and each piece of equipment is going to be different. So if you call intensive daily sampling 3 days in a row and you're getting testing results, they're all consistent and within range, then you can reduce the frequency. I'm going to do it twice a week. Those twice a week samples all come back negative, all within range. I'm going to bump that probably to monthly. So that all to say is it depends on your facility and your water quality specifically. And if you can show a logical path and logical data on the decisions that you've made, which we as consultants can help you develop that path, you're going to pass the audit and you're going to pass the inspection. Now, on the flip side is if you do 3 days in a row and they all come back different, right? The whole thought process behind this is, and following each treatment step is, okay, what piece of equipment is not performing consistently? Is it my RO? Do I need to switch out my DI? Once I get all the equipment that's supposed to be putting out water quality, it goes back to the less than, then you can reduce the frequency, but it's 100% based off of your individual results for your facility. Hopefully that wasn't clear as mud. Hopefully that answered the question.
Awesome. So DB asks, where do we get the implementation timeline?
Implementation timeline will be sent to you if you registered with your email address to this webinar. That timeline and the package pricing will be sent to you shortly following the webinar.
Great. R. Chavez asks, what is the testing cadence? Just colony and endotoxins? Daily sampling can be done by staff? Water strips?
Sure. We did not get into one section we did not talk about is the continuous ongoing water quality monitoring. Performance qualification is the first 12 months after the installation of your water treatment equipment. After that, there are sections, and there's table 4, table 5, and table 6 in the standard. The frequency and the parameters that are tested are, I believe, pH, alkalinity, hardness, Keller and turbidity, TOC, bacteria and endotoxin for critical water. Those are required once you get past, and this is a very important note, once you get past the 12 months of the performance qualification, those parameters for critical water are required monthly. And then utility water, there are parameters that are quarterly. Yes, once you get past the performance qualification, some of the parameters, go back in the slides here. These parameters, pH, alkalinity, there's another table that includes hardness, I believe connectivity is down here. There's a different table. Those are parameters you can do on site as part of your team if you've got the appropriate equipment. The only two you would need to send off to the laboratory would be bacteria and endotoxin, unless you're a hospital and you happen to have that capability, which most hospitals still send those off. But the rest of the parameters can be performed with field measurement tests. Absolutely.
Awesome. So DB asks, when I signed up for it, it asked for credit application. Can I still lock in pricing without credit application? I am with the government and a contractor will end up ordering the test kits.
Yes, we have included a link for if you would like to go ahead through the customer sign up process to be set up as a customer. Absolutely not required whatsoever. That first form is the only thing you need to do, submit it to our website to lock in your pricing. Good question.
Great. Now that's gotten us up to current with the question. So if anyone else has a question, you're welcome to unmute and ask it now. We'll take a few moments here in case you have a question you'd like to ask directly.
Just real quick, while you're all doing that or queuing up, if you do have additional questions, if you did not get the link for the form, again, no obligation to lock in your pricing. If you perform Section 9 for your performance qualification, as it is written in the standard, this will save you thousands of dollars in laboratory testing to lock in your pricing with no obligation to buy. So it's really a risk-free way to save money and budget accordingly for your facility. Again, that link is www.getchemready.com/AAMI-ST108-webinar.
Very good.
Any other questions before we let you all get back to your day? That's my 7 seconds, 7-second wait for any questions. Thank you all so much for attending today. Hopefully you learned a little bit. Hopefully we were able to give you an opportunity to save some money. We understand what a big lift it is to be compliant with this. AAMI did not make it easy on anybody to do this, but we hope that we provided a little bit of education and a little bit of budget relief for your facility. If there are any other questions, or if you need specific help with your facility, please reach out to our team. Again, we'll be sending you the roadmap timeline and the testing pricing from this webinar. If you have any specific questions that we can help with, we're happy to hop on a call, set up a meeting, or even schedule a site visit to come look at your system particularly.